He stalked the streets of Wichita, Kansas, claiming the lives of 10 victims. Known as BTK to the public, Dennis Rader would only be caught when he re-emerged 13 years after his last murder. But what was going on in the mind of this monster? Was he born evil, or did he become evil along the way?
My name is Dr. Eric Hickey. I'm a criminal psychologist. I specialize in the areas of homicide, sex crimes, psychopathology, and stalking, so that's what I do.
Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945, to William and Dorothea Rader. By initial accounts, he had a very benign upbringing. However, both parents were absent. Rader's father worked a lot, and his mother enjoyed watching TV, so the young Dennis Rader wasn't paid much attention to as a child.
I think that Dennis Rader was a man who, as a child, experienced some lack of attachment, where he didn't attach to his parents. Both parents were busy. They didn't really engage much in conversation, so he kind of felt isolated, probably underappreciated, and I think that bothered him.
According to Dennis Rader, via interviews and unpublished texts, he had violent sexual fantasies as a child. He claimed to have masturbated to his father's book on the Lonely Hearts Killers and to have killed animals. Though everything Rader said should be taken with a grain of salt, if this is true, what could it mean?
So often when children are harming animals, it's indicative that there's trauma in the home. Some terrible things could be happening in childhood that they can't express themselves. So then they express it through harming animals or setting fires. The fact that he was harming animals indicates that he suffered a great deal as a child. Was something going on that he doesn't want to talk about that was so traumatic? We don't know, because a lot of details we don't know about him. He's very guarded that way about his childhood.
Dennis Rader also recalled an incident from his childhood where he witnessed his mother getting her ring caught in a couch spring. She was terrified and crying for Rader to get help. Rader revealed that this is when he experienced sexual arousal and was excited to see a woman helpless and trapped.
I suspect that Dennis Rader had some sexual interest in his mother that lingered throughout his life. When Dennis Rader saw his mom suffering, that probably was one of the earlier events of his life, there could have been others, where he started to develop this paraphilia. As he went through puberty, of course, he's masturbating and he's thinking about the suffering of his mother, the suffering of people in general when they are in pain. He conditioned himself physically and psychologically to the suffering of other people. And so while he could live his double life, he could live a very normal life to people, but then he had this dark side where it's very sadistic, and that was his trademark, sadism.
In another unpublished text he wrote entirely himself, which is thought to be partially fictionalized with elements of truth by many experts, Rader offered up another memory with his mother, in which she beat him after discovering a seminal stain in his underwear, saying, "If you masturbate, God will come and kill you."
It's very likely that he had some kind of relationship with his mom. It's interesting, when you think about mothers, how invasive are mothers to boys in terms of their sexual activity? Do mothers always ask questions of their sons? Do you masturbate? I mean, it's not a question we normally ask. And yet, even though she found that semen, she went out of her way to point it out to him. Why would she do that? Knowing it would be embarrassing for him. That speaks more about her than it does about him. Because guys are going to masturbate. But why would she bring that to his attention other than to bring shame or embarrassment or some of maybe her own sexual interest in him? Consider that possibility. We need to be critical thinkers, explore all possibilities, ask the right questions, and it can take us down different pathways. We're not necessarily always right, but we can ask more questions. We can perhaps expand the sphere of conversation.
In the 1960s, Dennis Rader served in the Air Force. Having worked for the military himself, Dr. Hickey offers up an interesting correlation between serial killers and military service.
So I work for the U.S. military. I do a lot of consulting work for them. I train CID, criminal investigators, and I work with the victim specialists and family advocacy people. Over the years, we've seen that there's a lot of serial crime that goes on in the military. The military has been sort of a petri dish, if you will, that draws in far more men than women who have some murderous intentions. Most men who are trained in the military are not men who want to go overseas and kill people. But you get some who want to do that. We have seen many, many serial killers in the U.S. Army and Air Force and Navy.
He's right. Some serial killers and mass murderers that have been in the military include David Berkowitz, Gary Ridgway, Dean Corll, Timothy McVeigh, Arthur Shawcross, and Jeffrey Dahmer.
But now we're starting to pay attention that they're actually there. And so we've had dozens and dozens of them over the years. I think that they join the military because it makes them feel powerful. I think Dennis Rader is a man who sees himself as an authority figure. I think he probably felt important being in the military, got to wear a uniform. It makes you proud to wear a uniform. He was somebody. He was somebody in the military.
After he was discharged, Rader worked as a code compliance officer for Park City, Kansas. He also married and had 2 children, a daughter and a son, and was active in the Lutheran Church congregation, even acting as its president at one time. But there was a double life to Dennis Rader that he kept secret from everyone around him, a dark side that relished in violent fantasies and thoughts of murder. He referred to this version of himself as the Minotaur. After having long periods of normalcy, he would feel something pull him down.
He was so angry. That was one of the hallmarks of his killing career, is he had so much anger. I think he probably spent a lot of time in his own fantasies. And he was driven by his own narcissism because he felt he probably deserved more than what he was getting in life. He was angry about his childhood. He had a lot of unresolved conflicts. And so he turned to the dark side, and he never came back once he started it. That dark side where you can go and you don't feel anything for your victims. Their suffering is only gratifying for you. That's a whole different mindset. And that's the monster he's talking about. That monster comes out and destroys and then goes away again.
Dennis Rader would commit his first murder in 1974, stalking and killing 4 family members by strangulation. This was the Otero family. Rader expected that only the wife and her 2 children would be home, but was surprised to find the husband. After killing the parents, Rader suffocated their 9-year-old son by wrapping 2 shorts around his head and then a plastic bag. Finally, he took the 11-year-old girl down to the basement and hung her.
Strangled Mrs. Otero, and she went out, or passed out. I thought she was dead. She passed out. Then I strangled Josephine.
Is this something you were doing for your personal pleasure?
Sexual fantasy, sir.
Once he committed himself, he just kept killing. That tells you that he really wanted to act out his sexual fantasies and his rage. So it's very unusual to see someone do a mass murder and then continue on as a serial killer. But it was never his plan to be a mass murderer. His plan was to be a serial killer, or at least to kill one person, and then he'd do it again and again.
Aside from his desire to kill, Rader also had an extensive fantasy life that involved bondage and autoerotica. He would book motel rooms for himself, bind his wrists and ankles, and cover his head with a bag to restrict his breathing. He often photographed himself in these positions, wearing souvenirs from some of his victims. He also drew ropes on magazine cutouts of women and carried them around.
Autoeroticism is a very common activity. People who do autoeroticism often will do other types of paraphilic interests. Dennis Rader was the kind of person, he was into a variety of fantasies where there was potential self-harm. I think he was experimenting with the autoeroticism and other types of paraphilic interests he had, where he could experience some level of suffering.
In 1977, after his 7th murder, Rader became frustrated with the fact that he'd hardly seen his kills covered in the media. To combat that, he wrote to a local TV station saying, "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" This worked. Rader communicated with the police and news stations, sending them letters and packages. He even gave himself a name, one that would become his infamous moniker.
Bind, torture, and kill. He knew that would get the public's attention, and it did. Got law enforcement attention. It made the media. I mean, it was kind of like the Zodiac. You come up with a name, a buzzword that will get you into the media forever, and he did. Dennis Rader was absolutely a narcissist. It was all about him, the need for being in control, his rage. I think he felt really underappreciated And I think he thought he was smarter than everybody else. Yeah, absolutely.
Over a period of 2 decades, Rader would kill 10 individuals, stalking them all before eventually killing them. He imagined himself as a professional killer. He referred to each kill as a project, and codenamed each project based on a detail from the victim's personal life. He took it upon himself to learn his victims' work schedules, routines, and habits. For example, victim Vicky Wegerly was Project Piano because she played the piano.
I think he went hunting. He went into the neighborhoods doing his job, but also looking for potential victims. He was a true stalker. He did look for access to victims and how, I'm sure he fantasized about killing people, how he's going to do it. These weren't just random people he saw once. I mean, he spent some time on these people. Maybe he spoke to them in advance. Maybe he even said hello to them and talked to them a little bit, got to know them a little bit. I think that Dennis Rader really enjoyed the suffering of his victims. I think that was something important to him. It made him feel in control, made him feel powerful, and it gave him some validation that they wanted to have.
In 1991, the murders suddenly stopped. Rader has since said he was able to lean into his autoerotic fantasies to fend off his urge to kill.
I think his fantasies were just too grandiose. Kind of like Jeffrey Dahmer, just too much. There was just no way you could actually feel better about yourself because you kill a bunch of people and you make them suffer. I mean, that only lasts so long, that high, and then it's gone. Would he have gone back to killing? Possibly. Maybe he was in search of something else. I mean, Rader would never be totally honest with anybody in an interview. He'll never tell you the whole truth. He lies to himself. It's hard for him to face the real truth about his own life. Yeah, it was over. But he did say, and I think insightfully, quote, "There's a lot of lucky people out there." In other words, he could have killed a lot more. He decided to give it up.
Following a 2004 newspaper article that proposed the possibility that the BTK killer was either dead or in prison, Rader reopened his line of communication with authorities, beginning with a letter to the Wichita Eagle confessing to a 1986 murder. Over the next year, he sent several souvenirs from previous murders to media outlets, or would even leave them around Wichita. On February 16, 2005, Rader sent a floppy disk to the local station KSAS-TV, which included BTK's instructions for future communications. Police were promptly able to track down the owner of the disk by identifying the first name of the person who accessed it and the history of where the disk had previously been used. They arrested Dennis Rader 9 days later.
He did so much to get the police attention. The packages he sent and the way he was approaching them. I mean, the police, they were amazed. I'm sure they were shocked by how much information he was giving them. But I think he was done. I think he wanted to be recognized. I think he probably actually feared he wouldn't be caught. He's one of those, I think, that possibly he really did want to be caught because he kept throwing out information to law enforcement. And I think he wanted to be appreciated for his intellect. And, he wanted to be able to talk to investigators and tell them how smart he was. Narcissism, again, that keeps popping up.
Rader pled guilty to the murders, described them in detail, and made no apologies. He was given 10 consecutive life sentences. Some experts at the time described Rader as narcissistic. But was he a psychopath?
So in evaluating someone like Dennis Rader, which we did, he was one of the people that we randomly selected to be evaluated on the Hare scale between 0 and 40 points.
The Hare scale is a scale used to measure psychopathy. Comprised of 20 questions and made up of 40 points, it denotes the level of psychopathy that a criminal may possess. Everything below 20 points is typically reserved for common criminals, with 20 to 30 being reserved for sociopaths and 30 to 40 being reserved for psychopaths.
When we did this evaluation, we spent a couple of months on him. He turned out to be a 32 on the scale, which puts him up there with the top sadistic types of killers that you can imagine. It's pretty difficult to make that level. Ted Bundy's in that group. The Hillside Stranglers, very difficult to make that cut. I mean, I have a lot of predators who are lower than that because they have attachments to people. They still love their moms. They're still predators, but they don't have that sadism that we see at that level.
So, why were his crimes so shocking?
Dennis Rader is a really good example of evil. wearing sheep's clothing, looking like a nice person, but in truth, on the inside, he's really just a monster. And it's hard for us to conceptualize as someone who can be intelligent, articulate, and a nice person be a monster at the same time. He couldn't get past the demons of his childhood, and when he went hunting, all that rage and anger came out. He didn't just kill people, he massacred people. And once he started, he never turned back.
Enter a plea of guilty in this case, is that correct?
Yes, sir.